Welcome back to another edition of Real Spiritual Talk Radio. I'm your host, Lamont Gates, bringing you the world of faith, metaphysicality, and spirituality. Today, my guest had a life-changing near-death experience and is here to share it with us. Joining us today is near-death experiencer Christine McBride. Christine, welcome to Real Spiritual Talk Radio.
Thank you, Lamont. Thank you for having me.
No problem at all. Christine, I want to start this interview off with the religious question, as I do very often with my guests. Prior to having your near-death experience, were there any religious or spiritual beliefs you held?
Well, I was raised in a Christian Unity church, so I had that as my root, but I had a really difficult life for a long time. So by the time I had my near-death experience, I was more agnostic, just not saying I don't believe, but just not seeing a whole lot of evidence in my own life. Yeah,
So, in other words, you weren't sure if there was a God or not.
right.
Okay, fair enough. And with that said, why don't we go into what it was that actually triggered your near-death experience to occur?
Okay, I'll try to be quick about this. You need to know a little bit of background, and that is I was in the military and sprayed with jet fuel. And so over my life, I've had a number of autoimmune diseases and two cancers. And with the one of the cancers was breast cancer, and I ended up having bilateral mastectomies with reconstruction, which included implants in 2000, and that was in 2007. So fast forward to 2014, I fell, rupturing one of the implants and needed surgery. My doctor, I was so ill at the time, though, my doctor didn't think I would survive the surgery. So he told me to go home and do yoga and try to build up my strength, which I did. And it took me about a year. And I went in for the surgery in 2015. There was a mistake that was made in the first surgery. I internally bled and I had to be rushed back for a second surgery. Second surgery did not go well, and I ended up developing a life-threatening infection, which within 2 weeks of that second surgery, I was back in the hospital um, trying to get treatment. Excuse me. So sorry. Part of the autoimmune disease is that it affects my voice, so I do apologize for my hoarse voice. Um, I had the surgeries down in LA, but I live in Bakersfield, and I was at a local hospital, and they did not want to treat me because I was problem from another hospital. They didn't want to get involved. But I spoke to them and convinced them, and they got me into an ambulance. Excuse me. They got me into an ambulance and took me from Bakersfield to LA. And on the way down, I died. And the last thing I remember is talking to my doctor while I was in the ambulance, telling him we were on our way and the estimated time that I would be there. And then I slipped into unconsciousness, and somewhere along the line, I died. I remember being in the tunnel that everybody talks about, and it wasn't solid tunnel. It was like I was out in space. So it was just really dark outside the tunnel, and you could see beyond the tunnel. But there were these bands of light that went from behind me forward, and they were all different colors, and they were moving, and it formed a tunnel, but it was translucent. You could see beyond, and it was clear that I was in space. And the first thing that I felt was this feeling of unconditional love. And it was all through me. It was what I was made of. And I realized I came into like a remembering. So it's like, I remember who I am. This is who I really am. And, we come into the world, these beautiful love-based beings, but we sort of forget who we are. And so I remembered who I was, and I was finally out of this incredibly painful body, and I was basking in that unconditional love. And I was thrilled. I was in the bliss body and I was absolutely thrilled to be out of my body. And I remember just sort of snowboarding around the circle of the tunnel, just really just having a great time. And I don't know how long I was in there, but eventually I realized, well, okay, now what? But before that, part of it was that there was sound to it as well. So it's like if you can imagine every musical instrument making it sound, but really more than that, it was everything that could possibly make a sound, making a sound, which everything is made of vibrational energy, so everything makes sound. It was like everything making sound all at once, and it was one long continuous note that went through the whole experience. And you would think that all that noise would be so chaotic, but it wasn't. It was all perfectly and beautifully harmonized. And what was so important about that music was that the vibration of the sound was what was emanating the unconditional love. So it was like, as though the unconditional love was coming off the vibration of that sound. And then I was feeling the reverberation of that unconditional love through me. But I was also perfectly and beautifully harmonized with it. So the sound that my own essence or spirit made was all part of that whole sound. And so I was basking in that unconditional love energy and realizing that, okay, I'm in the tunnel alone. There's nobody with me. I'm thinking, okay, well, now what? And as soon as I kind of thought, well, now what? The side of the tunnel opened up. And what I was looking at was a beautiful landscape. It was gorgeous. And I had a very deep connection with it. And I thought, well, maybe that's my home. It's opening up and maybe I'm supposed to go there. I don't know. I couldn't explain why I had such a deep connection with it. But as I was looking around, I noticed that it was nighttime. It was as as beautiful a landscape as it was night, and there was a full moon, so it shed a little reflective light, so you could see everything. And as I looked around, there were no leaves on the trees. There was no grass or flowers in the meadow, no water in the river, and no animals. And it was as though it was a beautiful land template. It was a template for a beautiful landscape, but it didn't have any actual life in it. And as soon as I had that awareness, and I thought, oh, well, I'm wondering what that's about. There was a voice within me that said, you have beautiful life, beautiful. But up until now, you've done nothing with it. So your work is to go back and do the work to fill up that landscape. Oh God, I'm so emotional all the time when I talk about this. And it was absolutely true. Because up until then, at the time in 2015, I was 52 years old and I had lived a pretty awful life full of just pain and loss and tragedy. And I had taken a headlong dive into self sabotage. And I was pretty unhappy. I had created my own personal hell on earth, not only for myself, but for everybody that was involved with me. And I was a pretty defeated person at this point. And in that one experience, what it showed me, I believe what I was looking at was me really sort of projected out in landscape. And I think I think the messages that we get on the other side are so different and so unique to us because, because what will resonate with us is very different. We're all very different beings. And so what I'm an artist, and so showing me a landscape is something that I am tuned to, right? It's something that is very personal to me. And understanding that that was really what I was seeing was really my inner self and what I had done so far. And I think that it was that bit in the Bible. I think There's a bit in the Bible that talks about the treasures or the work we do here are the treasures we lay in heaven. And after all this time, I really do believe that that's what it was speaking to, that it was showing me what I had really set aside for myself, which was absolutely nothing, but what I came in with. So I understood that what the big problem was not, that my life was so terrible or that my body was falling apart. What was really holding me back was the fact that I didn't love myself. And it was all of that, the decades of self hatred and self loathing that really created that wasteland within me. And that's what it was showing me, the devastating effects of that self hatred, that low self opinion that I had held for myself. And so when I came back, everything changed. And I think I don't want to keep going on. I could go on and on. But if you have questions about that, that was sort of the end of the near death experience. I have memory of them bringing me back and, lots of people working over me. And it broke something open. It wasn't just that one spiritual experience. It sort of kept going and going and going as I recovered.
Yes, that is a very fascinating near-death experience that came with a message. You know, the important thing I think with a lot of these near-death experiences is that they do provide a message to us about our own personal lives. I just want to go back and ask a few follow-up questions just for some clarity. Now, you said you died on the way to the hospital in the ambulance, and from there, you recall being in a tunnel out of space. The tunnel was made of some sort of light, and you felt this unconditional love while you were in this tunnel. And ultimately, you stated that you had a bout of remembrance. You just remembered almost as if you came from this place rather than being born here and then going into this place. It was as if you were already there because, let's face it, if you can remember being there 9 out of 10, that's most likely where you came from. Do you have that as your belief coming back from this, that you most likely came from this place rather than going to this place?
Yes, I do. It's very hard to describe when you're there. And I've heard so many people with the same experience say this, which is this feels like the dream. That felt so much more real. And and it's as though there is like a veil that gets pulled across our memory while we're here. And the slate is wiped clean and we kind of come in, buy into the family and the experience that we're here to have, that we do come from wherever this was. And I'm sure there's, I mean, it's not just this tunnel. I had a little glimpse of everything I'm sure there is to experience out there. But one of the things that I am very clear about and made one of the biggest differences to me was the feeling that I was connected to everyone and everything, that I was part of the whole, whatever the whole is. So it's like in my mind, what we come from and what we go back to is sort of like a spiritual ocean sorts. And if you know anything about the ocean, you can reach in and pull out a little drop of the ocean. And in that little drop contains the whole ocean, right? We're like that. And the ocean is made up of nothing more than all of these little drops. That's what we are, and that's what I think that the when people talk about God is everywhere. I think that's kind of what it's about. Is that, and I don't want to say we are gods, right? Because it not in like the all powerful. We should start acting like little kings and queens on earth, but that within us, we contain the whole spiritual ocean. And if the spiritual ocean is nothing more than all of us, and the spiritual ocean is God, then that's how it all works. And I'm not sure if that's confusing or if that makes sense at all, but
I
it's kind of what
understand
it felt like.
I understand exactly. Another example or a metaphor that can be used is a mirror. You drop the
Mhm.
mirror to the floor, it breaks into a million pieces. One of those pieces is still part of that whole mirror, you know?
Right.
And that's kind of what we are, I guess. Spiritual entities broken up from something bigger, and then we return back to that
Yes.
big, origin that we came from. Now, you say as you went on to throughout the near-death experience that you didn't heard a sound, and it was something musical, and it was a long note, you stated, and this
Mhm.
note vibrated the unconditional love that you were feeling there. Now, many near-death experiencers talk about unconditional love. If you can compare this unconditional love as you felt here to any kind of love that you've known here on Earth, would there be a comparison?
That's well, if there was a comparison, it would be a fractional comparison. So it would be so much more intense, but it would be if anybody can think of the most awestruck moment that they've ever had, um, birth of a child, you know, um, being filled with love and gratitude and just wide open, that you're not holding yourself together at all. It's just one big feeling of it, expansive, expans, expansiveness. And it feels like you are steeped in bliss. Yeah.
Any love you could feel here, I guess you would say, would be magnified to a billion or 100 billion times more over there on that side.
Right. There is a way I can describe how it physically felt to feel it coming through my body or whatever the my spirit. And if you've ever taken one of those or gone to one of those concerts where they have the big speakers and you turn the music up really loud and you sit on one of those speakers and it's just reverberating through your body, that energy is reverberating, and that's the energy of the music, right? So consider that energy of the music, that one long note carrying with it vibration that shook your body, but with that shaking and that vibrational energy of the musical note, what it really brought with you was the feeling of unconditional love and knowing that you have always been part of this. You will always be part of this. This is just part of who we are.
And then you say a thought came to you. What next? You said to yourself. And that's when the tunnel opened up and you saw this beautiful landscape, or you saw a landscape rather, but it was nighttime, right? Um, but the landscape seemed incomplete, right? It was almost like a template, as you stated, of a landscape. And this is when you heard a voice. Now, was this voice audible or was it telepathic when it said, "You have a beautiful life"?
Well, it wasn't external, it was within me, but it wasn't, I've had other experiences where I've had sort of like been presented ideas without a voice, but this was definitely a voice within me, not from me, within me. So wouldn't be like I would be able to hear it outside myself, I wouldn't think.
And then the message continues saying that you haven't done enough with this life. And as you just exquisitely and eloquently stated, you believe that it was referring to the chaos that you brought upon yourself, ultimately, the non love for yourself, right? You failed to love yourself the way you probably should have been loving yourself, which then would have probably filled that landscape in and created the life and everything that belongs in a landscape, the grass, the ocean, the water, the sun, the sky, etc. Many near-death experiencers, they talk about having life reviews, and very often they see what they done to other people and what other people did to them, and they come back with the message that loving someone else, loving your neighbor, is a very, very important thing here on planet Earth. In addition to that, though, in addition to loving others, loving yourself is just as equally important. And I think we miss that message a lot because sometimes we get caught up in the, well, I must love my neighbor, but loving yourself is just as important because if you don't love yourself, it's very difficult to love your neighbor. Um, so you then say that you came back from this near-death experience. You woke up out of the hospital. Did you share anything with anyone after you came back from it?
Not for a while. No, it was a pretty horrific um, recovery. And for a long time, it was confusing. I actually, as I said, this experience has continued. I was in the hospital for 4 days, continued through the hospital and through my recovery. And while I was in the hospital, I thought, didn't say anything to anybody other than I kept asking for a chest x-ray because I knew the difference between pain I should be feeling from the surgery and broken bone pain. And I kept telling them I have broken bone pain. This is different from the pain I should be feeling. And so that was the only thing I mentioned to them. I thought I had lost my mind. I was I was nervous to tell people what I had experienced. And it was confusing for a long time, you know, because the experiences kept going through the hospital and the television in the hospital room was playing 24/7. For a while, I wasn't quite sure what was the television and what was the experience. And with all the medication, it took me a while to kind of regain my cognitive function to where I could sit with it. And yeah, it just took a while for me to figure that out. And I was really afraid that I had lost my mind. I mean, I was
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, many near-death experiencers come back with a very similar feeling. They're not certain what happened to them. Very often, they've never heard of a near-death experience. They don't know anyone else who's had one, so they think that something went mentally wrong with themselves
Mm.
until they start hearing more accounts that are similar to theirs, and they start warming up to the idea that they're not crazy and that this is a phenomenon that does happen a lot more often than they thought it did. Now, many near-death experiencers coming back from a near-death experience typically talk about after effects. They describe higher empathy levels. They describe coming back with a lack of fear of death. They may come back with precognition, premonitions, etc. Did you come back with anything remotely close to these?
Definitely no fear of death. And yes, I have always been pretty sensitive and pretty empathic, and that really ramped up. So I actually put it to work, and I became a Reiki practitioner, and I worked with um, cancer patients and all kinds of people.
Yeah, and it's a phenomenal thing about near-death experiences are the after effects. There's been several research studies just dedicated to the after effects alone. You talked about how you were living your life chaotically and you had a lack of self-love for yourself. How has that changed since you had your near-death experience?
You know, it's completely different now. And what I realized was that the whole reason that I felt the way I felt about myself was it was learned behavior because my mother felt this way. And what I what kind of broke open for me was that I saw that so many of my family members, in my family, I come from a long line of addiction and violence and abusive situations on both my mother and father's side. Both their fathers were violent alcoholics, and when something like that is so ingrained in your family line, it's just a story that gets passed down. And so I think the biggest thing that was revealed to me was that it was just that it showed me that I really didn't hate myself. It was what I had been shown and what I had been taught. to see as normal and a way of fitting in. And once I was able to kind of see that in my own family, I was able to begin to let go of that belief about myself. And it started to alleviate a lot of my physical pain as a result. That was one of the most amazing things is when what I was really in need of was I needed a physical healing, but what I was really in need of, what was at the root of that was truly I needed an emotional and a spiritual healing. And when I got that emotional healing, my physical body began to heal. And I know firsthand that, we have a mental body, an emotional body, a physical body, and a spiritual body. And they all have to be on the same, they all have to be cared for. And so much of our life, we hide away that emotional pain, believing that it's really, as long as we're not verbally saying it or acting out, um, or letting people know about it, we think we're hiding it from the world, and we really aren't. I mean, it's our emotional pain is kind of what we lead with, and it comes out in every action. It comes out in all of our interactions, and it really does spread poison and it's toxin to everybody around us. And when I was finally able to let go of that belief about myself and truly began to embrace and love myself, it began to heal my whole family line. And by that, excuse me, by that time, my daughter had a daughter of her own. And I had, unfortunately, because I only had that one story to tell her when she was growing up, he was acting that story out, hiding that terrible emotional pain and that low opinion of herself. And she was passing that on down to her daughter. I mean, this is just how it happens for all of us. And fortunately, she began to heal. And then her daughter began to heal. And to a certain extent, my mother began to heal. And she was, I lost my mom last year, and she came a long way. But one of the things that I really wished for her that she didn't get was really being able to love herself, you know. And and I know that she's there now because she's out of her body. But it would have been really nice to see her actually be able to embrace herself that way while she was here.
So it sounds like what you're referring to is what we call in psychology generational trauma being passed down from generation to generation. And usually what it takes is one generation to see this pattern and to ultimately break it. And I think it came about via your near-death experience, which gave you the inclination that you can break this, which ultimately healed you and started to heal everyone else around you. Very fascinating. Now, we started off the conversation with the religious question, and you said that you started out Christian, then you became agnostic. After your near-death experience, what does the topic of religion look like to you now?
Mm. Well, I still, I had some unfortunate experiences in a church growing up, and sort of soured me on religion, on the dogma of it. So I don't know that I would identify as any religion now. I've taken a number of years to look at a number of different religions, and I see a lot of similarities between them. And so I would say that I'm incredibly spiritual. I pray more and I sit with God and feelings of unconditional love for myself and everybody around me. Um, Far more now than I ever did growing up in those churches. So I kind of have a problem with the word religion. Um, but yeah, I would say that I was very spiritual, and I am still holding out my ultimate, um, like it's still a big question mark. as to where we go back to and what all the details are. But I know it's there, and I know that it contains so much love for everybody, and and then we are all part of it.
And that's a big difference from your agnosticism where you did not know. Now you've just stated you do know.
And I see evidence of God in my life every day.
Very fascinating. Well, Christine, I want to thank you for coming on Real Spiritual Talk Radio and sharing with us that wonderful account.
Thank you very much for having me, Lamont.
No problem at all. Ladies and gentlemen, Christine McBride.